Thanks so much, Mr. John Levin, for joining us today. Again, we're a collective of faculty and students here that are trying to preserve the history of the 1968 SS State students' rights. So I guess our first question for us is, where did you grow up?
Well, okay, I'll just give you sort of the beginnings. I grew up in New York City, a post-war generation, actually earlier than the baby boomers. I was born in 44. I went to school in New York and a boarding school in Connecticut. And then I went to Columbia University, or Columbia College, which is part of Columbia University. I grew up in I wouldn't call it a left-wing family, but left liberal, pro-New Deal. My father was a World War II veteran, served in the North Atlantic. And so they were basically, and what I would reason is important because that's what I was inculcated with, was sort of the New Deal popular front in the 40s. I think they aspired to be socialists. My father was an independent lawyer, represented a variety of clients, a lot of literary law, represented the breakfast state. My mother was a journalist. And basically, in the beginning of, I think, a lot of us are formed in our early college years, and my early years was sort of filled, I don't know why, now I don't remember, but sort of a cynicism and sort of influence of I would say, Kerouac and Ginsberg and fellow alumni, and that period in literature and film, and sort of adopted, I read Celine, for instance, and adopted the position that it was basically hopeless, the world was going to hell, and that was it. And sort of tried to avoid political activity, social activity. And I guess a couple of things sort of woke me up, I guess that's its expression now. One was the Cuban Missile Crisis, which at a certain point the epicenter was in New York, with the demonstration at the UN the night before while the ships were moving together, and suddenly, the end of the world became real. And then, that sort of passed and things went back to normal. And then the summer of '63, I took off for a year and I was running around with a pal from the Boston Museum in Europe, and a friend of mine was murdered in Mississippi. A guy I grew up with. He wasn't, a best friend or anything, but part of our crowd. And so I guess that got me thinking a little bit more, what was I doing, et cetera. And I came back to Columbia to finish up my last 2 years. Went to demonstrations and stuff. But really, it was like a lot of my generation, the Vietnam War became the issue. And, I went to meetings, but I wasn't an organizer per se, or actively, I would just hand out leaflets. And things were getting continually disgusting, and this fellow, I think his name was Fisk on WBAI, which is the New York KPFA, was publicizing these late night reports of the bombings of Hanoi, and that was just brutal. I mean, it didn't miss a beat, and I started getting angry. People got angry, and it was done. And then there was this. I was walking across campus. I was living on the Lower East Side at the time, commuting up to Columbia. And there were these people with signs up on the front of the steps of Lowell Library, which is the sort of the center of the Columbia campus. And essentially, I sort of looked, and they were blocking the NROTC graduation, or putting a picket line. And so I figured I'd join them before I went home, and there appeared to be two sections, one who were sort of pacifist, I don't know, totally pacifist, but whatever, and the others were very militant, and they wanted to lock arms and block the thing. And so I said that I felt that was for me. And so I joined that, and we weren't arrested, but we were censored by the university. You know, it was those days the cops put down their billy clubs and tried to break you up by hand, you know, with their own, and so that failed and they canceled the ceremony. But I got involved with these people who were the militantes then, which was a group around the May 2nd movement, which was really the first group to call, along with others, demonstrations against the war at a conference, socialist conference at Yale, maybe '62. I don't remember the date. Called for demonstrations, you know, May 2nd to protest the war, hence the May 2nd movement, and it was a group largely dominated by a Marxist-Leninist Maoist organization called Progressive Labor Party. So, you know, they were glad to have me at their demonstration and started piling literature, giving me literature and things. So I really hadn't, you know, I'd read sort of academic Marx stuff and sort of picked stuff up from reading. I hadn't really ever, you know, read Mao or Lenin and stuff. And for the book that most impressed me was a book called, or one that sort of put things in perspective, I guess is best to say, by Lin Piao. And I forget the title now, but it was a famous book, and it had the concept of a people's war, of the third world enveloping the first world, surrounding the cities, very much taking the concept of Mao did in People's War. And it gave a strength and a logic to what the Vietnamese and then the Chinese were doing. I started just poured through the literature. And but I was still, the other track was, I was working on a novel. I was always a writer now, was a writer then, and working on that as my senior project. And so it was sort of ambivalence. And so I did want to, before that, wanted to go to San Francisco State because they had a very exciting writing program at the time, a lot of interesting people here. Mm-hmm. I don't know what the state is now, probably the same. And so that was in the cards. So one day I was asked to come to some meeting, and it turned out a meeting of people who were going to join Progressive Labor, which I hadn't really thought about at the time, but why not? You know, why not? You know, get rid of this fucking government, I think was the attitude. And but I was a little bit of an outlier, and someone said they, at the meeting, stood up and said they didn't think I was the right type. I had long hair and I missed all sorts of things. So, but anyway, other people disagreed, particularly a nice young woman who later became my girlfriend. And so I joined, and then I told everyone I was going out to California, which wasn't approved of. Because, you know, it was sort of a disciplined party, and I didn't really quite know what it was, but it wasn't going to interfere with my plans. And so I got here, and my relation was ambivalent. But then there was a, I don't know, I think it was because it was the summer of '66, there were these House of Un-American Activities Committee hearings. And a large part of the contingents were the May 2nd movement and people from PL, others too, Jerry Rubin, Stu was in PL at that time, but and so everyone was called to Washington, all the leaders. So they had to organize, you know, raise money, defense committee like you usually do. For some reason, I was put in charge. I'd never done something like that in my life. But it was successful. You know, we had a big thing in Berkeley. Bob Scheer spoke, or maybe, no, he didn't speak. His campaign manager at the time, which was Robert Avakian, who went on to form the RU, spoke, and we raised a lot of money, and PL decided to put me in charge of the organization at San Francisco State. So that's sort of the background, how I got to San Francisco State, and this was in 1966.
Can you talk about what occurred to Andy Goodman? And you had mentioned he was someone you knew. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I tell you, there were a bunch of people who went on something that was called Freedom Summer,
Okay.
which was the organizing of basically not all, but mostly white students to go down in the South and conduct literacy and voter education things. And this was gigantic. In fact, many of the people from the San Francisco State Strike were down there or involved in that. And the leaders of it recruited people, and they were sent down. And Andy, I don't really like to talk about it. He was sent down with Mickey Turner, who was a full-time organizer. I think he came out of Saul Alinsky School, and a young guy, Cheney, who was an African American. I think he was from Mississippi or the South, and they got picked up by the police and then released and picked up by a sheriff. And there's a case going on now. They're trying to try the woman who no, that's Emmett Till. Maybe I'm confused, but. And they picked them up and took them and killed them and lynched them and threw their bodies in the river. Just absolute total brutality, and happens to you. It's just, I still remember as a young kid. But anyway, I really don't like to talk about it.
Yeah.
So, should we continue where we were?
We'll continue.
Yeah, so San Francisco State. So, they put me there. I was getting back into the way we were organized. A Marxist-Leninist party, as they call them, cells. We call them clubs. And they put me in charge of the student club. God knows why, because I had no experience. But none of us did, actually. We were all newbies. And our strategy at the time, the party was to build SDS chapters as a mass organizations, both to oppose the war and to bring students into a strategic thought of alliance with a working class and their allies. The idea, of course, was a Marxist Leninist theory of an armed revolution, not that it was something that we were preparing for in the sense of arms and that stuff, but saw it as the logical conclusion of this epic battle with capitalism. So the first thing I got involved in was cafeteria. Organizing of the cafeteria workers. We formed, I think, the first student union on campus, and that was largely, it was people I didn't start it. Other people had already started. I think it started out as a group of kids in the college, the new college year.
Oh yeah.
But we went in and we threatened picket lines and got, in fact, the Teamster support. We had the idea of going down to the Teamsters because they delivered the stuff, and they thought it was cute that these kids were doing this thing, and so they supported us, and they caved to the university and raised them. I forget, we got a good raise, I think $1 at that time, which was a lot. And then we organized around the war issues, and the other thing I'll just backtrack is that PL was a multiracial organization. Even at State, there was a guy, people from State, like Bridges Randall, whose picture I'm sure you've seen in the demonstrations. He's passed now, I think. Harry Dillon, and a few other people who I don't know want to be identified as being a former communist or whatever, but anyway, so we worked, and then there was we had ties with the community, because we had a community club in the Mission. We're very involved, and I would say the main thing PL was involved in then, besides State, was organizing against redevelopment in the Mission. or what was then called by Fortune magazine the Manhattanization of San Francisco. And the idea, just briefly, was the BART was put through the mission because they expected to knock everything down there and build condominiums. And that was the plan in '66, still a plan now, I guess. And there were two key events that we did, which began to galvanize the campus, the students and building the movement that I was in at that point, which was throwing recruiters off campus. There were a number of those demonstrations. The one that got the most publicity, I think it was covered by the Gator, was the Dow Chemical Company. And we basically threw them off campus, and the big question on campus was free speech, and this began the issue there. And then following fall was Stop the Draft Week. And that was probably the most militant demonstration to date against the war in Vietnam and against the draft. And so I wanted to go over this because I think one of the questions, to my mind, the uniqueness of San Francisco State was the wide involvement of so many people, and that it had its roots. I'm studying the roots in, basically it was called the white student movement, the anti-war student movement, but of course it occurred in other areas, like when I first came here, there was a rebellion in San Francisco. The National Guard was called out. One of the leaders of PL was a guy named John Harris in LA, was arrested in Watts for criminal anarchy, which was a big issue, so we brought him on campus to speak and stuff. But the things that started to really build was, I guess it was the spring of, my dates are confused, and you could correct it. I think it was the spring of '67. And there were a series of demands there for this is where I get vague, the TWLF had formed. And we organized a sit-in around the keeping of a number of professors. By we, I mean SDS and Third World Liberation Front. And the various, which included at that time Japanese student, Asian Student Association, Filipino Student Organization, and the Chicano Student Organization, not the African, not the Black Students Union, who opposed it. I'm not quite sure. I forget the reasons why, but in any case, we occupied the building. We stayed there 2 or 3 days, and Summerskill was fired, and they caved into a demand that they have, I forget how many slots for non-white students, special admission, that was called. It was considered a victory, though at a certain point there was a dispute on whether we should continue the sit-in. But it was the end of the school year, and I argued that we should leave it because we'd all be in jail and tied up with that and no support and everybody would go. So we called it off. And then I think the BSU ended up, I think they were having troubles of their own. I think they were going through a transfer. I think Jimmy Garrett went out and the new leadership came in, and I think it moved my impression from our impression, which is mine, from people, it was moving from a sort of from a strong cultural nationalist thing to a political thing, and they became, especially the influence of the Panthers. So I think that developed there. And then getting towards the next year, the Black Students Union became really very, they were always there and vocal, but they essentially seized the lead of things around the demand that they rescind they follow, well, come on. The university support their agreement to grant admissions, which they didn't, and so a deadline was set for the strike. Our thought was that our main goal in this strike, in terms of organizing for it, is that we had to convince other students, non-white white students, or and others, that this was their fight. That the concept that if one is not free, we all aren't free, and that our education is dependent, your education is dependent upon a multicultural university, and society is dependent upon this society, a multicultural society. And so, and then there was the tactical question, which was that a bunch of students, activists, wanted to demand that we include anti-war demand in the 10 demands, and so that was a big deal, and we fought against it, not because we wouldn't want it, but because it wasn't tactically right. And during the strike, what we did was we were the militant wing, along with leadership of the BSU and other leadership. And our main goals were twofold, really. Both, one was on campus, and organizing the students, mainly the teach-ins, which Ernie, I think, probably spoke very eloquently, and was very, very key in that, and other people going around to the classrooms and trying to get, and it was fairly successful. And then there was another aspect, which was harassment. I mean, we harassed professors who spoke out against the strike. We don't need to go into details, but they were reported, and tried to make it very unpleasant for people to go on campus, and had a whole, but it was a well-organized clandestine operation, and well as this picket line, which I'm sure you've seen pictures of. The other aspect of it was off campus, which was to involve as many organizations off campus. The BSU did the same thing with black churches, and they were an incredible force in this. And so our groups brought people from the mission, and people from other campuses, and people from the high schools that were working in the high schools. So the reason so many people showed up, well, it wasn't really spontaneous. It was because of the work that our organization and the programs at BSU, I remember they had a big tutorial program that stretched throughout the city. And so that was really basically what we did. And the key thing in the strike was keeping it going. It was that long, and it was sort of a momentous, a life-forming experience because of the collectivity, and over so many months that you got to know people you would never know, and got to be involved, and you really had a sense that you were part of this change in the world. And that you can make things better. I think that's sort of one of the reasons why so many of the people, because I actually myself, I did a book recently about people I was involved all around the country. And amazing to me, the people I talked to, although I only interviewed 23 people, got 23 people write essays actually, is that people were still involved socially, even after this. These are people now 40, 50 years later now, because this was, book came out in 2018, so that long, and spent their lives. So the aftermath of the strike, I think, was everyone with us, I myself personally was getting disillusioned with PL. They were becoming such a narrowly organization and critical of the lack of purity, which always happens, seems to be in these Marxist-Leninist organizations. First Cuba, and then the Vietnamese, because they were negotiating, and then the Chinese, and then of the anti-war movement. But the final key thing was that I was at, SDS by then was an organization, maybe, I don't know if they said 100,000. But they had these quarterly conventions, which would attract 1,000 people, and so we were coming, our contingent from San Francisco State, and we get there, and I get informed, as the head of I was by that time running the West Coast student section of the party, that the party's line had changed. That they no longer supported nationalism, and that all nationalism was reactionary. So here we were, right in the middle of the strike, and they're telling us that we have, and so then we just sort of ignored it at the convention and got a resolution passed. But afterwards, it was devastating because what we believed in was, and so we just continued doing what we were doing, and I dropped out a couple of years later, and everyone else dropped out. And it wasn't that was the position, was that their position was a basic classic, the working class has to lead, and that nationalism is not a class, and so therefore it inevitably ends to nationalism, a nationalist form instead of a socialist form. And I didn't think that was true then, and I don't think it's true now. I think it's part of a general united front struggle, and people could be nationalists and socialists, and so it just didn't wash, and I ended up sort of withdrawing, is what happened to me. And I was supposed to take over the party out here, and I sort of declined, and then I dropped out a couple of years later. So I don't know, that's about it. I don't know what else to tell you.
Yeah, I was curious about that the nationalism and cultural nationalism. How did that play out here at State? Did it play out? Was there,
like, it played out
with the BSU and the Third World Liberation Front? Did they? I don't know if that was happening at the national level with PL. I don't know what then were the relationships here at State.
At State. Let me see. It played out because there was within the BSU at that time, there was a real antipathy for joint actions with SDS and political activity in that sense, except regarding issues African Americans. So that was difficult. It also it was an excuse or an argument to not look into socialism and Marxism. I remember that was the fight that I remember Bridges, who was in the Bridges and Hard, that was the thing. They were essentially red-baited, that socialism is a white theory, that sort of stuff. That was at the most extreme. But it broke down a lot. I mean, there were a lot of people in the BSU by the time the strike was who weren't necessarily weren't sympathetic to PL's particular politics. Were sympathetic to working class politics and sympathetic to socialist politics. And I think they formed within the BSU. I know they did because Bridges was a part of a sort of a militant caucus. I don't know, they called themselves socialists, but a militant caucus, because there were a number of moves during the strike to settle it on not terms that I forget the specifics, but we were against settlement. It seemed like a sellout, and So, and, you know, those forces prevailed in the BSU and the TWLF, and the strike continued. So, but within SDS, I think the white students were intimidated, and a lot, unfortunately, and not necessarily so. It wasn't the African American students' fault. It was just, you know, people had never had relationships with African Americans or whatever. For myself, it was not so much an issue. I think largely because PL was known for their role in the Harlem Rebellion and in Watts, and you know there were a number of African American members in PL on campus. So.
Tiffany, did you want to ask a question before you?
No, I actually have to leave.
Okay.
But thank you so much. I am so happy that I met you and I got a chance to hear part of it.
Yeah.
I can't wait to hear the whole
I
part.
know. That's good
Thank you
stuff.
all.
Thank you for coming, Tiffany.
Thank you.
Well,
Yes, thank you.
So what would you say your role was? Should I start? What would you say your role was during the strike?
My role was to keep the strike going. Is that what you mean?
Yes,
That was what we were doing, and what I utilized and where I worked was within PL and keeping people. We had about 20 members then on campus, and then STS, which had over 100, and so it was like, you know, general manager in the sense of that part of it, you know.
Yes. And then you weren't going to classes in your MFA.
Oh, okay. My academic career at San Francisco State, I went to classes and then just got, you know, I stopped writing stuff, fiction, and started writing leaflets mostly, and articles, and got bored with classes, basically dropped out and stayed on as an organizer after the first year, I guess. So.
Now, were you arrested during the strike?
Yeah.
Okay.
I was arrested during the strike, and we went to jail for 6 months.
Wow. So you were in jail for 6 months?
Yeah.
Wow. Can you talk about that?
Sure. So I actually wrote something about it. I'll send you a copy or something if you want. Do you want that, or you just?
Oh, we would love that. I mean, what we're hoping to do is, you know, in the archive, we have a transcript and video, and there's anything that you've written about it that we can also have it linked.
That would be useful because it's contemporaneous. They're essentially formed from letters to my wife and child. Yeah.
Wow, we would love to read that. We've read the book that you wrote.
Yeah.
We've read your chapter in there.
Well, it's funny. Jail was again something to negotiate. We had a bunch of people in there, and it was a horrible jail. I mean, it wasn't brutal unless one of the predators could isolate you or something. There were some brutal guards, but we essentially organized ourselves and had reading groups, and they had a strategy. They put the political people on the farm team with the winos. So, go organize the cabbages. The guy, Captain Davis, said to me, "Put you out there, you can organize the cabbages."
Were you in jail with several other strikers?
Yeah.
Who were they?
Well, Danny Glover was in there one time. I was in a couple of times.
Okay.
Hari Bridges, Gordon DeMarco, Gene DeMarchi, and then there was a women's jail who were also in, so Sue Bethel was in at the time, and we tried to get mowing the lawn near the women's jail so we could talk to them. And then a whole bunch of people from the BSU. I think Benny Stewart was in, and Jerry Bernardo. You know, names escape me.
And were
but-
were you in jail here in San Francisco, or were you in San Bruno?
San Bruno,
San Bruno.
out in San
Okay, so you were
Bruno,
in San
yeah,
Bruno,
out in San
okay,
Bruno. Also, you know, you spend time in here too.
Yeah.
And then, but I think it was a big mistake, the whole jail thing, and I'm certainly partially to blame in the sense that we took the strategy, well, we'll just clog the jails. Well, they didn't give a shit.
Yeah, right.
And plus, instead of organizing stuff around the aftermath and consolidating things, you know, everyone was involved in legal stuff and in jail and getting out of jail and taking care of it. So it turned everything inwards, was the effect of it. I think that's what jail can do.
Yeah.
So that was a mistake, I think. I think would be, because they offered us plea deals.
Oh, they did? Okay,
Yeah, I
that's
mean,
right.
not me, but not to the certain people, right? They designated as leaders. But, and we took the.
So you weren't offered a plea deal, you had to go?
Yeah.
Okay. Because I heard that there were people wanted to go to court on it, like they.
Yes, that was that, yeah.
Okay.
But this was I was charged with inciting a riot and I think assault and a couple of other charges, I forget. So there was the mass arrest.
Yes.
And then there were arrests the year before.
Can you talk about the police at the time? Because every time we show images of that time period, students are like, wow, they were just so
Yeah.
harsh and brutal.
Uh-huh.
Can you talk about that experience?
Well, excuse me. My hearing aid is falling out. Excuse me. They were just beautiful, brutal. They cracked heads, bringing people and having convulsions to the hospital. You know, they wailed on people. You know, they had no compunction. I was amazed that nobody got shot because they took their guns out regularly.
Wow.
I remember they caught Hari and Dylan in the bathroom and put a gun to his head. But, you know, we also fought back. I mean, we weren't pacifists either. I mean, there was this one cop, we stole his badge and his handcuffs. And one, we got a pistol, too.
Oh, wow.
And that became an issue when we got it back.
We'd heard that people were throwing out marbles.
Marbles
one way of
on the,
resisting.
yeah.
When the police were on horses.
Well,
Yeah.
horses,
Yeah.
up around Holloway where the ecumenical house used to be. It was on
We were
the
just
corner.
like, there must have been a lot of marbles.
Oh, yeah.
We were just thinking about the marble.
Yeah. It was old labor tactic. I mean, we had these, and then also, we had these people showing up, old labor organizers, old wobblies. That's what you do. You get a striker, you take their clothes off and send them out in the street. Now they won't ever come back. Some old guy,
Yeah.
a lumber guy. But, you know, it's interesting. I mean, if that happened then, I'm sure there were people killed. I mean, the we were talking about was brutal,
Yeah.
but no one got 23 bullets in them.
Oh.
You know,
Yeah,
I mean, no one
yeah.
got really, right? I mean, it's.
We've seen images of students' heads being bloodied and.
Oh, yeah.
So that was occurring.
Yeah, Don McLean, I think his name was.
Yes, we
Who
were.
was an actor, became an actor.
Yeah.
But yeah. And
What would you say is the lasting impact of the strike on you?
what's the lasting impact? I was just my whole life. I mean, it influenced how I live my life and what's important to me, and you know, so the way I brought up my children. Yeah, just sort of it became, you know, I mean, not to say there weren't other things before, but that really became the central touchstone, I'd
Yeah.
say.
You mentioned white students being part of SDS. How do you think, how were the white students impacted by the Black freedom movements? And what was occurring with the BSU at the time? Was there this sort of this Black consciousness? How did that impact white students? And even yourself, how did that impact you?
Well, there are two groups, really. There were people who were really active before, in the civil rights movement, and were in the South. A number of both white and Black students that were at San Francisco State, or had been on these trips to Cuba. And there were a couple of trips which actually PL organized, but involved people from all over the country going to Cuba. Now, most people were, I think, sort of rolled with it. I mean, they saw it. They were the importance of it and how it made sense. The Black Panther Party is a legitimate organization. Other students were more in a pacifist, because the pacifist section of the anti-war movement was always strong, and it was very strong at San Francisco State. I remember at one point they got Joan Baez to come out, and she, one of her brighter moments, denounced the violence and stuff. And so that was an issue there, and that was in terms of the strike and supporting this strike and demands and being part of it, get them to see that this was their interest. They weren't doing missionary work. This was for them, and for their, and that, that was a struggle, and some people didn't agree, and some people, just disappeared. A number of people in PL, and a number of people, but
Wale, did you have some questions you wanted to ask?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned earlier that the strike was part of a nationalist demand, but also international cause of the anti-war. How did the international students at the state play a role in that?
Yeah. Well, the Persians were great. They were the foreign students. They were right on the front lines, and a couple of them went back and fought again, in the revolution there. Margaret just passed, found out one of the chief ones is still alive in the underground in Iran.
Wow.
And so they were magnificent.
How many Persian students were there that you remember? Were like 20, 30?
Well, I don't know how many there were, because I'm sure there were classes. There are some, but active there must have been 15,
Wow.
15, 16 Persian students.
Wow.
And there were like the Saudis. There was a table in the cafeteria, and there was some prince there who had court there, I guess. And they largely, the Latin American students were generally pretty militant and stuff. But San Francisco State, I don't know, but I don't think they had as big a foreign student population then.
But the international students were involved. Ray
Yeah.
Tompkin has mentioned an African international student that participated, but also was executed when he returned back to his home country.
I don't know him. I remember an African student always wore a red hat. I think he was from Rhodesia, though. He was a refugee from Rhodesia,
okay.
but I'm not sure.
Okay.
There are, of course, a lot of Asian students, but they weren't necessarily refugees. Maybe their parents were. They were first generation.
American-born, yeah.
And both the Filipino students and the Chinese students were the main contingents.
What was your observation of sort of, because the Asian American movement is started at that moment in time. What were your observations, and how did that impact your sort of own consciousness around?
Well, I mean, it was, I mean, it was great to be part of them. They were very compatible, and Paul Yamasaki was a big leader in that, and then we sort of bonded during the spring, because, you know, part of the demand, they were in the forefront, they and the Filipino students in that demonstration, so, but as far as foreign students besides, you know, as a group,
Yes.
it was really the Persian students.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And we have a graduate student that's really interested in Persian students and trying to track down folks.
Have you tracked anybody down?
I don't know, we've had difficulties, so we've asked Ernie to remember names.
Yeah.
If we can remember names, we'd like to track them down.
Well, there's one guy, who, his name slipped my mind, who Margaret got in touch with.
Oh, Margaret did, yes.
But you might be able to follow up there to ask her son to check.
Okay, her notes.
But he lives in, and maybe when Ernie comes, you remember his name. But he, I understand, is in San Diego.
Oh, the Hemi, or this?
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, he's in San Diego, okay.
You know, if you find one, it'd probably be a key to the others.
Yes, we're gonna,
Yeah, I would ask Ernie, and maybe, do you have the arrest list?
you were trying to find that, were they arrested as well?
I don't know.
Okay.
I just, you know,
Yeah, we were wondering with international students who were arrested, that implications,
yeah.
so many implications, you know.
Yeah, I don't know. I remember one demonstration at the Persian embassy that we went and supported them, and they
Oh,
were,
wow.
I think some were arrested there, but I you know, I may be
Yeah.
wrong about that.
Well, I'm gonna look into this, because
Yeah.
we definitely have students coming through that are really interested in this
Yeah.
part.
And you know, there are oddball people, I mean, oddball, you know, anomalies like Will Lightbourne came from Jamaica, you know, and you might want to try to interview him.
Will Lightboard?
Lightbourne, yeah, he was big mucky muck in the state. He was head of the welfare department, the state. I don't know what
Okay.
the office is, but the head of the state.
Will Lightbourne, he's
Yeah.
still around.
Yeah, he's
Okay.
in San Diego. Not San Diego, he lives in Santa Cruz.
Okay, we'll track him down.
I don't have my phone with me, or
We'll bother you about his contact.
Yeah.
We're trying to move quickly and trying to get everyone as we can.
Yeah.
Yeah. We'd like to, and he was a student at the time.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, he was a student and went on to, you know, rose in the ranks and was a state state official.
Oh, do you know what student organization he was part of?
Yeah, he was part of STS
Okay.
and BSU.
Okay. That's great.
Yeah, his father was, what did he tell me, his father was known as Mr. 10% in Jamaica, because he was so
Oh.
high up, he was some government guy.
Okay,
He got 10% of everything, I guess.
Yeah. When you look back, what do you feel like was like the greatest challenge or difficulty in that time? I mean, just even when you're thinking about yourself, as you're going through this, or like, God, this was so hard, or this, you know, it was so hard, you know.
In terms of the strike you're talking about, right?
In terms of the strike,
Yeah.
and maybe even you as a person.
Well, in terms of the strike, it was, you know, creating the unity
Yeah.
to meld these all the students together and keep that. In particular, the issue of the racial issues there. That was a continual problem, and our efforts to divide all the time.
Yeah,
on that,
efforts to
some about
divide,
police
yes.
agents and stuff. So I would say that. In terms of me, you know, I don't know how to put it. You know, the strike itself, there was no question. You know, you were just there and you did it because
Yeah.
you know, you were in a war in a way. Afterwards, you know, I was frankly very confused. I mean, in terms of politics and in terms of, you know, what I wanted to do, and you know, I suddenly returned to writing, you know, writing fiction again and working that. So but it's made me very wary of organizations, frankly. You know, I don't want to lead anybody, and I don't want to be led. I mean, there's that thing in me. Although I know it's particularly, you need organizations, and you need to do it, but there's somewhat of a visceral action there. I think it doesn't so much come from the strike, but from my experience in PL.
Yeah.
But to me, it was the most. I don't know, it was the most important, but certainly up there, the most important thing in my life that occurred, and formative. I think a lot of people would say that. In some ways, it was like going through a war. As dangerous as Vietnam, but nevertheless, I mean, people were. Some people never recovered really.
Can you talk about that, the folks that didn't recover? Say more.
There were 3 suicides in our group afterwards.
Oh.
I mean, during the course of the next 3 years. People who just couldn't find a life, lost that feeling of comradeship and unity, and didn't know, what to do, and 3. And I'm sure there were, people that I don't know about.
Others. Do you feel like it was like they were part of this movement and then it ended?
Yeah, it ended, and their life.
Yeah.
I've obviously had trouble beforehand.
Right,
I mean,
right.
I was depressed for a good period of time.
Wow,
Like that too.
wow.
But it was, that's
What did you go on to do? You continue to write after you?
Yeah, I was, by the time I was out of jail and stuff, I had 1 kid and another kid on the way.
Wow.
And so I had to work, and I was dropping out of PL, I was I got a stipend from PL, and I went to work for the phone company as a lineman. We did that until I found I got a job doing research for a guy who was making a film about a guy named Haskell Wexler, who was a famous film director and editor and DP on the Rosenbergs, a book adaptation of the Book of Daniel by Dr. Rowe. He did a book on the Rosenberg executions and thing, and so I was the perfect guy to do the research. So a friend of mine got me in, and so I learned how to write scripts. I teamed with another guy and did another script and got an agent, and did fairly well for about 5 years, and then I started working for magazines. And then sort of the bottom fell out, and then I got a union card in the Display Workers Union, setting up trade shows like stagehand. And then I did a book, a fiction book. During the course, I worked 6 months and write, and the book did fairly well. I got some more film things, so I worked in the film business for.
Wow.
So that's.
I got a film earlier.
Yeah. So that's sort of the trajectory.
That's great.
Wow. Yeah, it was George Leong, who lives in New
Sure.
York. He went on to do film after the strike as well.
Yeah. George, He was a sound man, right?
Yeah, he was.
Yeah.
Did you know him?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're trying to get in contact with him to.
Oh, are you having trouble?
Yeah, we've had trouble.
Mhm.
You
He
got
doesn't
an
answer
email
our
for him?
emails. We don't have a phone number.
Yeah. Well, did you check with Paul? He's a good friend of Paul's.
Well, Paul gave us an email, but there's no phone number. We tried emailing and doesn't respond.
Yeah, well, he doesn't want to talk.
Oh, is that
You
it?
know.
Okay, because
He's
we always,
perfectly,
we worry. When people don't answer emails after Margaret, I was like, We try to find phone numbers and then,
Yeah.
but if we had a phone number from him, we'd call. We would call.
Yeah, well, he doesn't want to give out his phone number. I'm not going to do that, but I'll email him and tell him that
Oh,
you're
please,
that you're
please, please.
thing. And be
Yeah,
nice
I mean,
people,
even
man.
Yoko was in New York City and she's like, let me go interview
Yeah,
George.
I was in New York and I was like, oh, let me just try to bump into him or whatnot.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Now, Tiffany had a question. She wanted you, can you speak to the administration's tactics, like Hayakawa, using racism and anti-communism to thwart the efforts of the PLP and SDS against the ruling class? I don't know if that question,
No, to do what?
I
My
don't know.
hearing's not great, but
Were they, were their tactics using racism and anti-communism sort of to divide folks? I don't know if that, I think that's your question. for
he
the-
was in terms of there was continual red baiting of PL and SDS. They're
Yeah.
communists. They're using you for other purposes. And
Okay, yeah.
so on and so forth. Hayakawa would spout all that, but he was just a maniac. He just
Yeah,
that's
that's-
all. He never presented a reasoned argument or gave a
Yeah.
speech about this except discipline and that.
He
sort
seemed
of-
like he was following orders from Ronald Reagan, basically.
Yeah, or his own marching to his own drummer. Someone who was his TA, and he was invited. Who was a TA in I guess it's state, and the guy was also teaching in San Quentin at their school, and so he invited Hayakawa to come and speak to the cons. So Hayakawa came and gave him a lecture on law and order. I mean, that's, he was, but there was a lot of anti-communism, from the BSU and the nationalism,
Yeah,
black nationalism
yeah.
stuff, and in SDS too.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
but,
And were SDS folks ready to tackle racism? They were ready to tackle. I mean, that was
Yeah,
a
I mean,
language they.
yeah, I mean, I think people in that organization all had good hearts, I mean, and believed in that. I may not have been the most tactful or the most clear, or they may have been, but a good bunch of people. It was basically, the strike committee went way beyond SDS. SDS was, 100th strike committee was, we had meetings that filled up the bottom of that. I guess the church is still there on Fillmore and Fillmore and Haight, that's for a meeting at 9 o'clock at night after being on picket line. So
Wow.
it was a
And
lot.
you were part of the Central Committee? Or
The Central Committee was the BSU.
Oh, the BSU, okay. the
Yeah.
BSU,
The strike committee, I forget how it was organized.
Okay, okay.
I forget.
Well, you were in those meetings?
Yeah.
Yeah. I would go till
Not the
9.
BSU meetings.
Okay, not the BSU
Yeah.
meetings, but the meeting where there was like everyone's
Yeah,
coming
yeah,
together
yeah,
meetings,
yeah.
Ernie said you all never broke bread though together.
What?
He says the one thing about the strike, he was like, goodness, we never broke bread together. Like we never ate together. Like we were all working together on the cause, but there was never like food. So we talked about food.
Huh.
It's like he said, and so he's like, Grace, if you organize events with all of us strikers, make sure you're we're breaking bread together because we didn't do that during the strike.
Well, I don't know if we had the time. I remember pizza.
Okay.
I was gonna say, like, pizza would be a good thing to have at meetings to pass
I
around.
remember pizza. I was driving by Bruno's, which has gone through as many reincarnations. We used to go there on Mission Street. We used to go
Oh,
for
Bruno's,
pizza.
yeah. We did hear about the parties.
Uh-huh.
Political organizing was happening at the parties.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, and the BSU was hosting the best parties, and
Mhm.
Cloud9 was playing, and
Uh-huh.
so parties, were kind of this place, they say, of political organizing. I don't know if that was SDS as well.
Any case was, you invite people to parties, you invite people over to your house, you
Yeah.
go on hikes. There's a
Oh,
group.
okay.
There was a group you should probably talk to. Went to Altamont during the thing. Was
really?
Rolling
Altamont?
Stones. I didn't go. I
Okay.
asked Ernie. I think this woman, maybe Lori Nardinelli. Have you heard of her?
What's her name?
Lori Nardinelli.
Lori?
But ask Ernie. He'll know who went to Altamont.
Oh, I like hikers. I like
Yeah.
hikers. That's us now.
And
So Sydney, did you have some questions?
I did have a question, like, more of a
lighthearted question, but what is like your favorite, like your happiest moment or your favorite memory, like being a part of the strike?
You know, it was really the end of the days, you know, when we'd gotten through it and we'd won and, you know, we'd kept it going another day. It was really oriented towards that. Just, I mean, it was just totally self-involving,
Yeah.
you know, or not self-involving, group involving. You know, we'd go home, I would buy some wine or some beer and talk about, you know, the cops and who got kicked and who was, you know.
Like
what
every
we
day was
done.
purposeful.
Yeah,
Like it felt
yeah.
purposeful. Like,
And then evenings, sometimes we were organizing stuff to do too. You know,
so happiness was the meaning. That was,
yeah. You know, there's someone, if you can get her to talk, her name's Susan Bethel.
Okay.
She was involved in a lot of interesting activities during the strike. Her email is Newson, Susan spelled backward,
Okay.
at AOL.com, I think.
Okay.
And you can tell her I gave her my name,
Okay.
her name. She lives in Oakland,
Okay.
so,
Do you think she might be willing to talk to us?
yeah, if you get her in the right mood. You know,
And is she mobile? Like, could she come here?
last I saw,
She
you
was
know,
okay,
it's, yeah, last I saw, was quite mobile.
Okay,
But,
okay. Because she might have some stories for us.
yeah, she definitely would.
Yeah, and
Uh,
you had your
She
child.
was only Mexican in Westchester County.
Oh, only Mexican in Westchester County.
That's what she says. I'm not sure that's
Okay, but she's Mexican?
Mixed, yeah.
Oh, mixed,
I
yeah,
think her
yeah.
mother was Mexican, her father was Caucasian.
Okay, okay. Now, you were kind of like an older student because you had your child, right, before you went in?
No, I didn't have my child. Liz got, my first wife, got pregnant in, I guess during the strike. We
Strike.
were married at the Ecumenical House.
Okay,
And Jen was born in March of 70.
Oh, 70, okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
so, no, I didn't have a child then, yeah.
Okay, not during the strike, okay. Yeah, because we've heard of different folks that were strikers, but who were fathers, and yet they were still participating in the strike,
Yeah,
and then
oh,
it was
yeah.
like they had kids at home, and,
Well, there was one, Jan Solganic, who had 2 kids, who was in PL.
wow. Do you remember, you mentioned professors that weren't for the strike, weren't for the strike, and how there would be like harassment.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember some of the names of those faculty
What
members
the
that
hell
were?
was his name? Bunzel.
Huh?
Bunzel.
Bunzel?
Bun, yeah.
What department? What was Bunzel in?
What?
What department was Bunzel in?
He was the head of, I think, political science, or
Yeah.
dean or something.
This is not the first time we've heard something about the political
We've
science
heard about the
department.
political science department being
Yeah.
just really reactionary and just
Yeah, I think
resistant.
he was the head of it, yeah.
What do you remember of Bunzel?
Well, you know, I saw him, he didn't like me, I didn't like him, you know. What happened was one evening, he woke up in the morning and his car had been covered with paint remover.
Oh.
So,
He got really mad.
so that he still, I saw something written by him, he still talked about, but there were a lot of faculty who were very friendly and very supportive.
Would you say the majority of the faculty were in support of the strike, or?
You should, there were at least a couple hundred. I don't know how many people were on the faculty
Yeah.
at the time, because there was a
Okay.
whole big faculty which had nothing to do with it. I remember the people who went to state and they were in the engineering, getting engineering degrees.
Right,
and
right.
left, So, but that's a big contingent,
Yeah.
and they fired a whole bunch. We interviewed faculty at all.
We're trying to do that.
Yeah.
Steve Zeltzer said Ted Keller we should interview.
Oh, yeah.
And then Anatole.
He's
who-
dead. I'm not dead, he's senile.
But Peter thinks we can still try to interview him.
Well, Well, you know, Peter is a good friend of his, so he.
Yeah, Peter Shapiro,
Yeah,
so,
I know him. I haven't seen him in a while.
okay. Was Peter part of, Peter was an SDS, right?
No.
Okay.
He was in the strike committee, of course. He was running the newspaper, the Other or something? was it
Yeah.
called?
Open process.
Yeah, open
Yeah,
process, yeah.
Open process, yeah.
Yeah.
His book is really the best details on his book, I think is the best book on the strike.
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah.
So.
Okay, Kevin, do you have questions you wanna?
I'm kind of like selfish, just curious to like what your involvement in film was and like.
Yeah.
if the
You know,
strike
I was sort
influenced that, so.
I was sort of bottom fisher. I wrote scripts, edited scripts, part of scripts, developed concepts for basically. I worked with Danny Glover on a couple projects.
Oh, wow. Wow.
With Coppola on a project, you know, none of which saw fruition. And then I worked on a bunch of stupid TV things and cop shows and stuff, doing dialogue. I didn't want to move to LA, and that in
Right.
terms of a career, that was that was a big mistake. I mean, in terms of doing that, but I don't regret it actually, because I have my family up here, but I had gotten divorced and stuff, so my kids were up here.
Gotcha. Did you like ever write about your experiences in the strike in like a fiction type of thing?
It sort of creeps in.
Mm.
Sort of creeps in here and there,
Right.
but nothing specific. Ernie's going to do that.
Mm.
Yeah. Ilko, do you have a question?
I do have a question. I was wondering, excuse me. I was wondering how it was being suspended alongside Roger Alvarado and other leaders in the strike. But like Hayakawa suspended you and other students. Like, so how closely were you working with Roger Alvarado to be in that situation where you're grouped together?
Well, we were working together because I was sort of a leader of the, the STS, whatever you call it, PL. So I was dealing with them too. We were discussing things and arguing and stuff. So that was, sort of. We were arrested. There was a group of us that were arrested together. Well, the thing we didn't touch on was the whole thing about the gator and that incident. And there were a bunch of us arrested for, which, I think I wrote about it in my essay, in that essay, a big turning point in the campus where the BSU confronted, a bunch of students from the BSU confronted, which really horrified the vast majority of the campus, and that was one point where PL basically stood by themselves. And a lot of other STS didn't agree. We reorganized this march onto up to the administration building with the students and football players screaming at us, and, doing that, and demanded that demanded that they lift the suspensions. In any case, we broke into the building. They locked the building and broke into it, and a bunch of us were arrested for that. And then I think the year before we were arrested for something, I forget. It was sort of a dance almost, but the last one was serious. But that was a big turning point. That was very interesting to see, because you asked that question before about racism and the white students, and that's where it really came out, that there was no talking to people almost, because they were just so fixated on that, they were frightened to death, I guess. We were able to turn it around. There were a couple other things with the administration. I'm trying to remember the incident now. I know it was. We had a demonstration. I think it was the Marines were on campus, right? And so this was after the incident at the Gator, I think that following spring, and we had a picket line in front of it, and the jocks organized a thing and attacked us, basically.
Wow.
And so the administration's response to say, well, that's bad, but they didn't suspend it, so we immediately put out a leaflet and black, white, this is what happens, suspension versus a pat on the wrist. And that really sort of clarified what we've been trying to tell people and explain to people.
There was a white reactionary group of students, right, that just like refused to participate in the strike, that were going to classes, right? They're just
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah.
You know, and, but
I have another question.
please.
What, I don't know if you touched on it earlier, but what was your like family's reaction or to you being involved in the strike?
By that time, they'd sort of gotten over my activities, and so they were supportive. Particularly my father, who quoted me only when we said we were going to defend ourselves in front of the court. He said, "A man who what did he say? A man who represents himself as a fool for a lawyer." That's what he quoted me.
What did they think like before before the strike when you were starting to get involved in organizing?
They approved of that. They approved. They went on the march to we all went on the march to Washington together. However, communism and big member, they did not approve of that, particularly my father.
Can I ask you how the march was?
What?
Can I ask you how the march was? Like how?
It was just amazing. Amazing thing to be involved in something like that.
That's
Just amazing.
that you went.
Yeah, it's amazing.
So
What was the energy like on that march? What was the energy? What were you feeling?
it was just it was a feeling that we'd arrived, that the world arrived now at a new place. That there was that whole period of and I think partially the angry reaction and the militancy was sparked by the feeling that things, after the Kennedy assassination, Johnson pushed through the New Deal, or he felt that everything was, it was going to be right. We were going to right things, and the civil rights movement, that. But so it was a celebration. At least that's what it seemed to me.
Like, compared to that, how you felt then? How do you feel now, I guess, in terms of, I feel like we're so polarized in terms of like politics and racial relations.
I'm afraid I'm not very optimistic. I'm not very optimistic. I'm more about, I just don't know what's going to happen. I wish I could be more positive. Largely in the international situation, inequalities, the incredible inequalities in the world at large. It's not tenable, that world like this, in my opinion.
I have a few more questions. Do you recall any American Indian participation during the strike?
There was some, but there's a guy, Pat Guillory, who is Native American. Current term is who lives in the city as a lawyer, and you could give him my name.
Cool.
And I'm not I didn't, ask him.
Okay.
There were certain individuals like him who participated.
He's still practicing, Pot Guillory?
Yeah, I think so. He
How do you
has an
spell his
office
last-
on 16th and
What's his last
Dolores above the cafe. You know that
16th and
cafe on
Dolores.
Okay.
Dolores Park?
So Guillory is spelled,
He's from Louisiana, so it's that type of spelling.
Okay.
Guillory.
Okay,
Yeah.
great.
My family's from down there, so I was like, let me guess.
Yeah, so, yeah.
That's great. We'll follow up.
He might be a good person to ask, you know.
That's great.
And,
Was he was part of the strike then, Pat Guillory?
yeah,
Okay.
I didn't actually know him during the strike.
Okay.
He knew me, but I didn't know him. I ran into him later. Well, he was working at the phone company. And
That's
I
great.
went to both, I think. Went on both. Hastings, actually.
So is there anything you would like young people to know about the strike?
You know, I mean, I was just the history.
You've given
Just
us
the
enough.
history.
You've given us enough.
Just the
Okay.
history. I mean, that's what I can give. I'm not, as I said, I'm ended giving advice and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
that's the history, and it's wonderful that people are doing this and keeping this up. And I'm shocked sometimes that people don't know stuff. You know, younger people.
But, I mean, it's a follow-up question. I mean, what do you think are the legacies of the strike today?
Well, San Francisco State was, 85% white. I think it was before it was. I just changed the whole educational system. Was key to that. I mean, that was that's by and large towers over everything else. Is the whole development of African American studies and ethnic studies and importance of that. But anyway,
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you for
okay,
this
you're very
interview.
welcome.
This is such a
Yeah.
great
This was
interview.
such a
Thank
good
you so
interview.
much.
Yeah.